Imagine driving the race of your life, fighting for victory at Monaco, when suddenly you hear your own team planning to fire you. That's exactly what happened to Fernando Alonso on lap 47 of the most important race of his comeback. Through a radio glitch that wasn't supposed to happen, Fernando heard words that would change everything. If Fernando doesn't improve his attitude by the end of this race, we're activating the clause. We have Drugovich ready to take over for Hungary, his own team, planning to replace him in the middle of the race. What Fernando did next would expose the biggest conspiracy in Formula One history, save his career, and prove that some legends never fade away. They just wait for the perfect moment to remind the world why they became legends in the first place. This is the true story of how a 41-year-old driver turned betrayal into triumph, and how one radio message changed everything. The roar of 30,000 people echoed off the tall buildings around Monaco's famous racetrack. Fernando Alonso felt his heart beating fast as he drove his green Aston Martin through the narrow streets. Lap 47 of 78. He was in second place, right behind Max Verstappen's Red Bull car. This was the moment he had been waiting for. 10 years since his last win. 10 long years of fighting with cars that weren't fast enough, dealing with team problems, and listening to people say he was too old. But today felt different. Today, his car was working perfectly. "Great job, Fernando," came the voice of Marco, his race engineer, through the radio in his helmet. "You're only 2 seconds behind Max. Keep pushing." Fernando smiled inside his helmet. The car felt amazing under his hands. Every turn, every brake, every gear change was perfect. Behind him, Lewis Hamilton in the silver Mercedes was trying to catch up, but Fernando wasn't worried. He knew these streets better than anyone. Monaco was special. The racetrack went right through the city, past fancy hotels and expensive shops. Rich people watched from their balconies while race cars flew by at 200 miles per hour. One small mistake here could mean crashing into a wall with nowhere to go. But Fernando loved it. This was where champions showed what they could do. He flew past the famous casino corner, his tires gripping the road perfectly. The crowd cheered louder as he got closer to Verstappen. Maybe, just maybe, he could win today. Then something strange happened. Fernando, box this lap. Box, box, box. Marco's voice came through the radio, but it sounded different. Worried, nervous. Fernando looked at his steering wheel display. His tires were fine. His fuel was good. The car was running perfectly. Why would they want him to come into the pits? Now? He was catching Verstappen? "Marco, the tires feel good," Fernando said into his radio microphone. "Why are we pitting? Just trust us, Fernando. Box this lap." But Fernando's gut told him something was wrong. In 22 years of racing, he had learned to trust his feelings. And right now, his feelings were screaming that this pit stop didn't make sense. As he came around the last corner before the pit lane entrance, Fernando slowed down. Should he go in? Should he trust his team? His finger hovered over the radio button to ask more questions. That's when it happened. A crackle came through his helmet speakers. Static. Electronic noise. And then, clear as day, he heard a voice that wasn't meant for his ears. "If Fernando doesn't improve his attitude by the end of this race, we're activating the clause. I don't care if he's a 2-time champion. We have Drugovich ready to take over for Hungary." Fernando's hands gripped the steering wheel so tight, his knuckles turned white. The voice belonged to Mike Crack, his team boss. They were talking about firing him? In the middle of the race? His mind raced faster than his car. Felipe Drugovich, was their young reserve driver from Brazil. Hungary was the next race in 2 weeks. Were they really planning to replace him after everything he had given this team? After working 18-hour days to help them improve the car? After bringing them from nowhere to fighting for podiums? The radio crackled again. This time it was Marco, sounding normal. "Fernando, are you coming in? The pit crew is ready." Fernando's heart was pounding. Through his mirrors, he could see the pit lane entrance getting closer. In a few seconds, he would have to make a choice. Go into the pits like they wanted, or negative on the pit stop, Fernando said firmly into his radio. "I'm staying out." He pressed the gas pedal to the floor and flew past the pit lane entrance. Behind him, he could imagine the chaos in his team's garage. But he didn't care. If they wanted to fire him, he was going to show them exactly what they would be losing. "Fernando, what are you doing?" Marco's voice was sharp now. "You need to pit." "The tires are fine," Fernando replied, taking the next corner perfectly. "I'm staying out." But his mind was spinning. How long had they been planning this? Who else knew? Was this why some of the team members had been acting strange lately? Was this why Mike had been avoiding him? Fernando thought about his career. 2 world championships, 32 race wins. He had driven for the biggest teams in Formula One. He had battled Michael Schumacher, Lewis Hamilton, Sebastian Vettel. He had never given up, no matter how bad the car was. And now they wanted to throw him away like an old tire? The anger burned in his chest, but Fernando turned it into pure focus. Every corner was perfect. Every brake point was exact. He was driving like a man with nothing to lose because maybe that's exactly what he was. "Fernando, please listen to us," Marco pleaded through the radio. "You need to trust the team." Trust the team? The same team that was planning to fire him without even telling him? "I trust my driving," Fernando said back. He caught sight of Verstappen's Red Bull up ahead. The gap was getting smaller. With every turn, Fernando was proving that his old tires could still work magic. The crowd was going crazy as they realized what was happening. But Fernando barely heard them. All he could think about was that radio message. The words kept playing in his head. "We have Drugovich ready to take over for Hungary." Well, if this was going to be his last race with Aston Martin, he was going to make it count. He was going to show everyone, what Fernando Alonso could do when he had nothing left to lose. The gap to Verstappen was now just 1 second. Fernando could see the back of the Red Bull clearly. The next 30 laps would decide everything. Not just the race, but maybe his entire future. As he set up for another attack on the race leader, Fernando had no idea that the radio message he had accidentally heard was just the beginning. There was something much bigger happening behind the scenes. Something that would change everything he thought he knew about his team, his career, and who he could really trust. But for now, all that mattered was the next corner, the next overtake, and proving that Fernando Alonso was far from finished. The hunt was on. 3 weeks earlier, Aston Martin factory, Silverstone, England. The meeting room was cold and quiet. Mike Crack sat at the long table looking at papers spread out in front of him. Numbers, charts, and contracts filled the white sheets. But the most important paper was the one he held in his hands. Felipe Drugovich's contract. The young Brazilian driver was only 23 years old. He had won the Formula 2 championship last year and had been working as Aston Martin's reserve driver. In the simulator, he was fast, very fast. Some people said he might be the future of the team. Mike rubbed his tired eyes. Being a team principal was hard work. Every day brought new problems, new pressure, new decisions that could change everything. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," Mike said. 3 men in expensive suits walked into the room. They were members of the Aston Martin board, the powerful businessmen who really controlled the team. Mike knew why they were here, and he didn't like it. "Mike, we need to talk about Fernando," said Richard Palmer, the oldest board member. His voice was serious and cold. Mike sighed. This conversation happened every few weeks now. "What about him?" "His attitude is becoming a problem," said another board member, James Wright. "He complains too much about the car in interviews. He makes us look bad when he criticizes our engineering choices." "He's just being honest," Mike replied. "Fernando knows more about racing cars than most people. When he says something isn't working, he's usually right." Richard shook his head. "It's not about being right. It's about being professional. We can't have our driver telling the world that our car is slow." Mike wanted to argue, but he knew it was pointless. The board members didn't understand racing the way he did. They understood money and public image. To them, Fernando's honesty looked like disloyalty. "We think it's time for a change," James said quietly. Those words hit Mike like a punch to the stomach. "You want to fire Fernando? In the middle of the season?" "We want to be ready to make a change if needed," Richard corrected. "If his attitude doesn't improve, we need options." Mike looked down at Felipe's contract again. The young driver was talented, but Fernando was Fernando Alonso, 2-time world champion, one of the greatest drivers who ever lived. "The board has made its decision," Richard said firmly. "Prepare Felipe to take over if necessary. We'll make the final choice after Monaco." After the board members left, Mike sat alone in the quiet room. He felt sick to his stomach. How could he fire a legend? How could he look Fernando in the eye, knowing what they were planning? But Mike also knew he needed his job. He had a family to support, bills to pay. The board could fire him just as easily as they could fire Fernando. He picked up his phone and called someone he trusted. "Hello?" came a voice on the other end. "Lawrence, it's Mike. We need to talk." Meanwhile, in Oviedo, Spain, Fernando Alonso was running on the mountain trails near his home. Sweat dripped down his face as he pushed his body to its limits. At 41 years old, he trained harder than drivers half his age. His phone buzzed with a text message. He stopped running and checked it. "Fernando, great work in the simulator data review. The car setup looks promising for Monaco." "Marco," Fernando smiled. Marco was a good race engineer. He understood Fernando's driving style and never tried to change it. Unlike some people on the team, Fernando had noticed things changing at Aston Martin lately. Some team members acted different around him. Conversations stopped when he walked into rooms. People seemed nervous. But Fernando had been in Formula One for over 20 years. He had seen team politics before. He knew how to handle pressure. His phone rang. The name on the screen made him happy. Felipe Massa. "Felipe, how are you, my friend?" Fernando answered. "Good, Fernando. I wanted to check on you before Monaco. How are things at Aston Martin?" Fernando paused. Felipe had been his teammate at Ferrari years ago. They had been through many battles together. If anyone would understand, it was Felipe. "Honestly, something feels wrong," Fernando said. "The team is acting strange. Mike avoids talking to me about next year's contract. Some engineers treat me like I'm already gone." "You think they want to replace you?" Felipe asked. "I don't know. Maybe. But I'm not giving up without a fight. Monaco is my chance to show them what they would be losing." "You always were stubborn," Felipe laughed. That's why you're still racing at 41. After they hung up, Fernando looked out at the mountains around his home. This peaceful place had been his refuge for years. Here, away from the politics and pressure, he could think clearly. He thought about his career, the wins, the losses, the times people said he was finished. Every time, he had proven them wrong. Every time, he had fought back stronger. Back at Aston Martin factory late that evening, Mike Crack sat in his office again. The building was empty, except for security guards and a few engineers working late shifts. His computer showed an email from Lawrence Stroll, the team owner. The message was short. Meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. Important business. Don't discuss with anyone. Mike stared at the screen. Lawrence rarely called sudden meetings unless something big was happening. Was this about Fernando? About the board's plans? A soft knock made him look up. Marco, Fernando's race engineer, stood in the doorway. "Mike, do you have a minute?" Marco asked. "Sure, come in." Marco closed the door behind him and sat down. He looked worried. "I've been thinking about the Monaco setup," Marco said carefully. "Fernando's data looks really good. He could win that race." Mike nodded. "He's always been special at Monaco." "Mike, is there something I should know? About Fernando's future with the team?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Mike wanted to tell Marco everything. About the board meetings, about Felipe's contract, about the plan to fire Fernando. But he couldn't. Not yet. Just focus on making the car fast for Monaco. Mike said finally. "That's all any of us can do." Marco studied Mike's face for a long moment. Then he nodded and left. Alone again, Mike looked out his office window at the dark parking lot. Somewhere out there, Fernando was probably still training, still preparing, still believing in his team. Mike had never felt worse about his job. He didn't know that in a few weeks, a radio glitch would change everything. He didn't know that Fernando would accidentally hear the conversation that would expose all their secrets. But most importantly, he didn't know that there was someone else pulling the strings behind all of this. Someone with their own plan for Fernando's future. The phone on his desk rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. "Hello?" Mike answered. "Mr. Crack, this is about our previous conversation. The plan is moving forward. Make sure you're ready to act after Monaco." The line went dead. Mike stared at the phone, his hands shaking slightly. Who was that? What plan? This was getting bigger than just the board's decision about Fernando. Something else was happening. Something he didn't understand yet. But soon, everyone would know the truth. Back to Monaco Grand Prix, lap 48, the Aston Martin garage exploded into chaos. "What is he doing?" shouted Mike Crack, throwing his headset onto the pit wall. Engineers and mechanics stared at their computer screens, in shock. Their driver had just ignored a direct order to pit. On the screens, they could see Fernando's green car flying past the pit lane entrance at full speed. He was chasing Max Verstappen like a man possessed. "Get him on the radio," Mike ordered. "Tell him to come in next lap." Marco, Fernando's race engineer, pressed his radio button with shaking hands. "Fernando, you missed your pit window. Box next lap, please." Through the speakers, Fernando's calm voice came back. "Negative. The tires are working. I'm staying out." The entire garage fell silent. In Formula One, drivers didn't ignore team orders. Especially not twice. Mike's face turned red with anger. "This is exactly what we were talking about. He's impossible to control." But Dr. Andy Green, the team's technical director, was staring at his computer screen with amazement. "Mike, look at his lap times. He's getting faster, not slower. On those old tires, he just set his personal best lap. Mike looked at the numbers. It was impossible, but the data didn't lie. Fernando was making his worn tires work like magic. Clock. 49 Fernando could see Max Verstappen's Red Bull getting bigger in front of him. 1 second gap, then half a second. The Dutch driver was the best in the world right now, but Fernando had something Max didn't have. Nothing left to lose. Behind him, Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes was trying to catch up. But Fernando wasn't worried about Lewis. He had beaten Lewis before. Today, his only target was the car in front of him. "Fernando, your tires are going to fall off," Marco warned through the radio. "Please trust us and pit." "I trust my hands," Fernando replied, taking the Lewis corner perfectly. "And my hands say these tires are fine." In the Mercedes garage, Lewis Hamilton's engineer was amazed. "Lewis, Fernando is flying on those old tires. His pace is unbelievable." "That's vintage Fernando," Lewis replied through his radio. "When his back is against the wall, he becomes dangerous." Lap 52 in the Aston Martin garage. Mike was on his phone again. But this time, someone was listening who shouldn't be. "Yes, I understand," Mike said quietly into his phone. "After the race, we move forward with the plan. Fernando's behavior today proves our point perfectly." "What?" "No, I can't talk louder. Too many people around." Marco pretended to study his computer screen, but his ears were focused on Mike's conversation. "Plan? What plan?" "Drugovich is ready?" Mike continued. "Good. We'll announce it after Hungary if Fernando doesn't." "Yes, I know what we discussed." Marco's blood ran cold. They were really going to fire Fernando? After everything he had done for this team? But on track, Fernando was doing something incredible. He had closed the gap to Verstappen to just 0.3 of a second. The crowd was going wild. Lap 55. "Fernando, you're in DRS range," Marco shouted into his radio, forgetting about everything else for a moment. "You can attack!" Fernando could see the rear wing of Max's Red Bull opening and closing as they played the DRS game. Down the main straight, Fernando pulled alongside the world champion. 30,000 people in Monaco stood up and cheered. But Max was smart. He defended his position perfectly, keeping Fernando behind him. The battle was just beginning. In the McLaren garage, watching on TV, team principal Zak Brown smiled. His phone buzzed with a text message. "Everything going according to plan. Stand by." Zak deleted the message immediately. Lap 58 Fernando was driving the race of his life. Every corner was perfect. Every brake point was exact. His old tires shouldn't be working this well, but somehow they were. "This is impossible," said the Sky Sports commentator. "Fernando Alonso is making those tires last through pure skill and determination. This is why he's considered one of the greatest drivers ever." In the garage, even the Aston Martin mechanics were starting to cheer for their driver. Politics aside, they were watching something special. But Mike wasn't celebrating. His phone rang again. "Mike, it's Lawrence. We need to talk after the race. Something's come up. Big changes." "What kind of changes?" Mike asked. "Not over the phone. Just be ready. Everything we planned might need to change." Mike hung up, confused and worried. What was Lawrence talking about? The plan to fire Fernando was solid. The board had agreed. What could have changed? Lap 61 Fernando finally made his move. Coming out of the swimming pool section, he got a perfect exit. Max's car wobbled slightly over the bumps, and Fernando saw his chance. Down the short straight toward Rascasse Corner, Fernando pulled alongside Max again. This time, He was on the inside line for the corner. "Come on, Fernando," Marco shouted, forgetting all about team politics. Side by side, the two cars entered the corner. Fernando's old tires found grip that shouldn't have been there. Max had to give him room. When they exited the corner, Fernando Alonso was leading the Monaco Grand Prix. The crowd erupted. Even in the Aston Martin garage, people were jumping and cheering. For a moment, everyone forgot about contracts and politics and plans. Everyone except Mike, who was staring at his phone in shock. A text message had just arrived from an unknown number. "Watch the news tomorrow. Your firing plan just became impossible. Some secrets are about to come out." Mike's hands started shaking. Who sent this? What secrets? What news? Lap 63 Fernando was now leading by 2 seconds. Behind him, Max was pushing hard. But the Spaniard was in complete control. "Fernando, you're leading the Monaco Grand Prix." Marco's voice was full of excitement. 17 laps to go." "Copy that," Fernando replied calmly. But inside his helmet, he was smiling bigger than he had in years. This was for everyone who said he was too old. This was for everyone who wanted to replace him with a younger driver. This was for everyone who thought Fernando Alonso was finished. Indeed, the McLaren garage, Zach Brown was no longer smiling. His phone was ringing non-stop, but he wasn't answering. In the Aston Martin garage, Mike was getting more mysterious messages. "The truth about McLaren comes out tomorrow. Your driver just saved his own career without knowing it." Mike stared at the message. McLaren? What did McLaren have to do with Fernando's contract? Lap 65, Fernando's gap to Max was now 3 seconds and growing. The old tires that everyone said would fail were still working perfectly. "Fernando, your pace is incredible," Marco said. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." "I'm doing what I always do," Fernando replied. "I'm driving like my life depends on it." But Fernando had no idea that his life, his career life, really did depend on it. He had no idea that his decision to ignore the pit call had started a chain of events that would expose secrets much bigger than just his team wanting to fire him. He had no idea that there were people watching this race who were very, very worried about what might happen next. All Fernando knew was that he was leading Monaco, and nobody was going to take that away from him. The battle was far from over. Monaco Grand Prix. Lap 56A's, Fernando flew through the streets of Monaco. His mind drifted back through time. The sound of his engine became like music, taking him to places he hadn't visited in years. Hungary, 2003. He was just 22 years old. Fernando could still remember that day perfectly. He had been driving for Renault, a team that nobody expected to win. The race was crazy, with rain and crashes everywhere. But somehow, Fernando found himself in first place, with 10 laps to go. "You can win this, Fernando," his engineer had said through the radio. "You can be the youngest winner ever." Fernando's hands had been shaking on the steering wheel that day. Not from fear, but from excitement. When he crossed the finish line, he couldn't believe it. He had beaten Michael Schumacher. He had beaten everyone. That victory changed his life forever. Lap 57 now, 18 years later, Fernando's hands were steady as rocks. He had learned so much since that first win. He had learned how to handle pressure, how to make impossible moves, how to never give up. 2005. His first championship year, Fernando smiled as he remembered beating Michael Schumacher for the world title. Everyone said it was impossible. Michael was the greatest driver ever, they said. His Ferrari was unbeatable, but Fernando proved them wrong. Race after race, he fought the German legend. Sometimes he won, sometimes he lost, but he never stopped believing. When Fernando won the championship that year, he was only 24, the youngest champion ever at that time. The world was watching a new king being born. Fernando, gap to Max is 4 seconds. Marco's voice brought him back to the present. You're controlling this race perfectly. Lap 58 Fernando thought about 2006, when he won his second championship. That year was even harder than the first. Everyone was trying to beat him. Everyone wanted to knock the young king off his throne. But Fernando was ready for them. He raced with the wisdom of a veteran and the hunger of a rookie. When the season ended, he was champion again. Those were the golden years. The years when everything seemed possible. Then came Ferrari. Fernando's mood darkened as he remembered 2010 to 2014. 5 years with the red team. 5 years of almost winning the championship, but falling short every time. 2010 was the worst. He should have won that championship. He was leading the points going into the final race in Abu Dhabi. All he needed was to finish in the top 4. But Ferrari made a mistake with strategy. They called him into the pits at the wrong time. He finished 7th. Sebastian Vettel won the championship by just 4 points. Fernando had cried in his helmet that day, not from sadness, but from anger. He had done everything right, but his team let him down. Lap 59. Fernando, you're doing an amazing job, Marco said. The whole world is watching you right now. The whole world. Just like when he was young and winning championships. But now he was 41. People said he was too old. People said his time was over. 2012. So close to the championship again. That year, Fernando drove some of the best races of his life. The Ferrari wasn't the fastest car, but Fernando made it dance. He won races he had no business winning. Going into the final race in Brazil, he had a chance to win the championship. But Sebastian Vettel won it instead. By just 3 points, Fernando remembered sitting in his car after that race, staring at the rain on his visor. 2 championships. That's all he had. But he knew he was good enough for more. Then came the dark years. 2015 to 2018 with McLaren. 4 years of driving slow cars. 4 years of fighting for points instead of wins. People started saying Fernando was wasting his career. They said he should retire, but Fernando never gave up. Even when his car was seconds slower than the leaders, he still drove every lap like it was for the championship. Lap 60 Fernando thought about his time away from Formula One. 2 years racing in other championships. The Indianapolis 500, where he almost won. Le Mans, where he did win. People said he was running away from Formula One, but Fernando wasn't running away. He was learning, he was growing, he was proving that he could win anywhere, in any car. 2022. His return to Formula One with Aston Martin. People didn't expect much. They said he was too old. They said he had been away too long. They said modern Formula One had passed him by. But Fernando showed them all. In his first race back, he finished 3rd. The old master was back. Fernando, 10 laps to go. Marco's voice interrupted his thoughts. You're still leading by 3 seconds. 10 laps. 10 laps to prove that Fernando Alonso was still the same. Driver who won those championships 20 years ago. Lap 61 Fernando thought about all the people who had doubted him over the years. All the journalists who wrote that he should retire. All the team bosses who chose younger drivers instead of him. and now his own team wanted to fire him. The anger burned in his chest again, but Fernando turned it into speed. Every corner was perfect. Every gear change was smooth. This was what 22 years of experience looked like. Behind him, Max Verstappen was pushing hard. The young champion was fast, but Fernando was smarter. He knew exactly where to place his car to make overtaking impossible. "This is my house," Fernando thought, as he went through the famous Monaco corners. "I've been racing here since before Max was born." Lap 62, Fernando remembered his promise to himself when he came back to Formula One. He had promised to never give up, to keep fighting until the very end, to show the world that age was just a number. Some people said 41 was too old for Formula One. Fernando disagreed. He was faster now than he had ever been. Not just his car, but his mind. He understood racing in ways that young drivers couldn't. "Fernando, you're driving the race of your life," Marco said, and Fernando could hear the emotion in his engineer's voice. "No," Fernando thought, "I'm driving the race of my life so far. The best is still to come." Lap 63A's, Fernando prepared for the final 15 laps. He thought about his legacy: 2 championships, 32 wins. But maybe, just maybe, there was more to write. Maybe this race, this moment, this battle against his own team's plans to fire him would be remembered as the day Fernando Alonso reminded the world who he really was. The radio crackled in his helmet. "Fernando, you're incredible out there. Whatever happens, we're proud of you." It was Marco again, and for the first time all day, Fernando heard something different in his engineer's voice. Respect, loyalty, maybe even love. "Thank you, Marco," Fernando replied. "Let's bring this home." As Fernando entered the final phase of the race, he carried with him the weight of all those memories. The victories, the defeats, the comebacks, the setbacks. They all led to this moment. This moment when a 41-year-old driver was showing the world that legends never really fade away. They just wait for the right moment to shine again. And that moment was now. Monaco Grand Prix. Lap 63, Fernando's moment of glory was about to become his greatest test. Behind him, Max Verstappen had found extra speed from somewhere deep inside. His Red Bull. The gap that had been 4 seconds was now shrinking fast. 3 seconds. 2 seconds. 1 second. "Fernando, Max is right behind you," Marco warned through the radio. "He's got DRS and fresher tires." Fernando could see the Red Bull in his mirrors, growing larger with every corner. The young world champion was hungry for victory, and he wasn't going to make this easy. But Fernando had something Max didn't have. He had nothing left to lose. Lap 64 in the Aston Martin garage, the atmosphere was electric but tense. Engineers and mechanics were on their feet, watching their driver battle for the lead. But Mike Crack stood apart from the celebration, his phone pressed to his ear. "I don't care what's happening on track," Mike said quietly into his phone. "The plan stays the same. After the race, we make the announcement about Drugovich." Dr. Andy Green, standing nearby, couldn't help but overhear. His face showed confusion and anger. "Mike, are you serious? Fernando is leading Monaco, and you're still talking about replacing him?" Mike covered his phone and glared at Andy. "This is bigger than one race. The board has made their decision." But Andy wasn't backing down. "The board is making a huge mistake. Look at what he's doing out there." On the screens, they could see Fernando defending brilliantly against Max's attacks. Every move was perfect. Every block was legal but aggressive. This was master-class racing. Lap 65 Max made his first real attack coming out of the swimming pool section. He pulled alongside Fernando on the short straight, but the Spaniard was ready. Fernando squeezed Max just enough to make him lift off. "The gas! Brilliant defense!" shouted the Sky Sports commentator. Fernando Alonso is showing why he's one of the greatest wheel-to-wheel racers ever. The crowd was going wild. 30,000 people were on their feet, watching two champions battle at Monaco. This was why they loved Formula One. But in a quiet corner of the paddock, something else was happening. A man in an expensive suit was walking quickly between the team motorhomes. He wasn't wearing any team colors, and he seemed nervous. The man stopped outside the McLaren hospitality unit and made a phone call. "It's not working," he said urgently. "Fernando is winning. The plan is falling apart." Lap 67, Fernando's tires were finally starting to show their age. After 25 laps of incredible performance, they were beginning to slide. Max sensed the weakness immediately. "Fernando, your rear tires are starting to go," Marco reported. "Be careful in the slow corners." Fernando could feel it too. The back of his car was getting loose, but he had been here before. In his 22 years of racing, he had made old tires work when they shouldn't. Max attacked again at the hairpin. This time, he got a better run out of the corner. Down the hill toward Portier, the two cars were side by side. The crowd held its breath. Fernando positioned his car perfectly on the inside line. Max had more speed, but Fernando had the better position. As they braked for the corner, Fernando held his ground. Max had to back out, or they would crash. "Incredible racing," Marco shouted. "You're not making this easy for him." Lap 68 in the McLaren garage. Team principal Zach Brown was pacing back and forth. His phone had been ringing all day, but he wasn't answering. Something was clearly bothering him. "Sir," said one of his engineers, "should we prepare a statement about Fernando? The media is asking questions." Zach stopped pacing and stared at the engineer. "What kind of questions?" "About his future? About rumors of him joining us next year?" Zach's face went pale. "We're not commenting on anything today. Tell the media. We're focused on our own race." But inside, Zach was panicking. How did the media find out? The plan was supposed to be secret until after Fernando was fired. Lap 69, meanwhile, in a different part of the paddock, Lawrence Stroll was having an urgent meeting with three men in dark suits. They weren't from Aston Martin. They weren't from any team. "Mr. Stroll, we have evidence of tampering," one of the men said, showing Lawrence a tablet computer. "Someone has been interfering with your team's decision-making process." Lawrence studied the screen, his face getting angrier with each page. "McLaren? They've been manipulating our board members?" "The evidence is clear. Phone records, email, chains, financial transfers. They've been running a campaign to get Fernando fired so they could sign him." Lawrence stood up suddenly, his chair falling backward. "That's illegal. That's corporate espionage." "We're prepared to take action, but we need your cooperation," the man continued. "And we need Fernando to keep racing the way he's racing right now." Lap 70 back on track, Fernando was in the fight of his life. Max had found another gear and was pressuring him at every corner. The gap between them was less than half a second. "Fernando, 5 laps to go," Marco said. "You're so close to something special." But Fernando's tires were getting worse. Coming out of the tunnel, his rear end stepped out slightly. Max saw it and immediately moved to attack. This time, Max got a perfect run down the main straight. He pulled alongside Fernando as they approached the first corner. Two champions side by side, fighting for Monaco. The crowd was screaming so loud that even the drivers could hear them through their helmets. Fernando had a choice. He could defend aggressively and risk both of them crashing, or he could be smart and try to repass later. But Fernando Alonso didn't get to where he was by backing down from fights. He held his line. Max held his line. Into the corner they went, separated by inches. Lap 71, somehow, both cars made it through, without touching. Fernando was still leading, but barely. Max was right behind him, close enough to see every detail of the Aston Martin's rear wing. In the garage, even Mike had stopped talking on his phone. This was racing at its purest level. Politics and contracts didn't matter when you were watching. Something this special. "Come on, Fernando," whispered Dr. Andy Green. "Show them all." But Mike's phone buzzed with another mysterious text. "Check the news in 10 minutes. McLaren's dirty game is about to be exposed. Your driver just saved himself without knowing it." Mike stared at the message, his hands shaking. What news? What dirty game? Lap 72, Fernando could see the checkered flag in his mind. 4 laps to go. 4 laps to prove that Fernando Alonso was far from finished. 4 laps to show his team what they would be losing if they fired him. But Max wasn't giving up. The young champion was driving, like his life depended on it too. This wasn't just about winning Monaco anymore. This was about respect. This was about proving who was the better driver. As they went through the swimming pool complex, Max tried one more desperate move. He got alongside Fernando on the outside, but there wasn't enough room. Fernando squeezed him toward the barrier, forcing Max to back out again. "That's how you defend," Marco shouted. 3 laps to go. In the stands, the crowd was going crazy. This was the kind of racing that people would talk about for years. 2 legends, 2 generations, battling for every inch of track. And Fernando Alonso, the 41-year-old master, was showing the world that experience and determination could still beat youth and speed. The explosion of excitement was about to reach its peak. But the biggest explosion of all was happening behind the scenes, where secrets were about to be revealed that would change everything Fernando thought he knew about his team, his future, and who he could really trust. The truth was coming, whether anyone was ready for it or not. Monaco Grand Prix. Lap 73, Fernando's heart was pounding as he entered the final 5 laps. Behind him, Max Verstappen was like a shadow, following every move, waiting for one small mistake. But Fernando had been in this position before. He knew how to handle pressure. "Fernando, you're doing something incredible," Marco's voice came through the radio. "The whole world is watching." Fernando smiled inside his helmet. "Good. Let them watch. Let them see what a 41-year-old has-been could do when his back was against the wall." The crowd was on its feet as the 2 cars flew past the grandstands. 30,000 people were screaming Fernando's name. He could feel their energy, through his helmet, through the thick walls of his car. It gave him strength. Lap 74 in the Aston Martin garage, the atmosphere was electric, but strange. The mechanics and engineers were cheering for their driver, but Mike Crack stood apart from everyone else. He was still on his phone, still talking about plans that seemed crazy now. "Fernando is about to win Monaco, and you're still planning to fire him?" Dr. Andy Green confronted Mike directly. "Have you lost your mind?" Mike covered his phone and glared at Andy. "You don't understand the big picture. This is about more than one race." "What bigger picture? He's proving right now that he's still one of the best drivers in the world." But Mike's phone buzzed with another message. This time, his face went completely white as he read it. "Mike, whatever you're planning, stop it now. Check the news. Everything is about to change. LS, Lawrence Stroll. Mike's hands started shaking. What was his boss talking about? Lap 75 Fernando was driving the lap of his life. Every corner was perfect. Every brake point was exactly where it needed to be. His old tires, which should have been dead 20 laps ago, were somehow still gripping the track. Max tried one more attack at the hairpin. He got a good run out of the corner and pulled alongside Fernando down the hill. The two cars were inches apart, traveling at 180 miles per hour. But Fernando was ready. He had been racing for 22 years, and he knew every trick in the book. He positioned his car perfectly, making it impossible for Max to complete the pass. "Brilliant defense," shouted the TV commentator. "Fernando Alonso is showing why. He's a master of this sport." Lap 76 in the McLaren garage, Zak Brown was no longer just nervous. He was terrified. His phone kept ringing, but he didn't dare answer it. Something had gone very wrong with their plan. "Sir, there are reporters outside asking about Fernando Alonso," one of his assistants said urgently. "They're asking about secret negotiations." Zak's face went pale. "Tell them we have no comment, and lock the doors. Don't let anyone else in." But it was too late. Outside the McLaren hospitality unit, a group of journalists had gathered. They had cameras and microphones, and they were asking very specific questions about things that were supposed to be secret. "Mr. Brown, can you comment on the allegations that McLaren has been interfering with Aston Martin's internal decisions? What can you tell us about the plan to get Fernando fired so he could join your team?" Zak pulled the curtains closed and hid in the back of the motorhome. Lap 77 Fernando was one lap away from victory. One lap away from proving everyone wrong. One lap away from the sweetest win of his career. Behind him, Max was still pushing, but Fernando could sense that the young champion was running out of ideas. Max had tried everything, and Fernando had an answer for everything. "Last lap, Fernando!" Marco shouted through the radio. "One more lap, and you've won Monaco." Fernando's eyes filled with tears inside his helmet. 10 years. 10 years since his last victory. 10 years of people saying he was finished. 10 years of driving cars that weren't fast enough. But today, he had made a slow car fast through pure skill and determination. Lap 78, the final lapaz. Fernando came around for the final lap. The crowd erupted in the loudest cheer in Monaco's history. People were crying, jumping, hugging strangers. They were watching something special. Fernando could see the checkered flag in the distance. Half a mile to go, then a quarter mile. Max made one final desperate attempt coming out of the swimming pool. He pulled alongside Fernando one last time, but there wasn't enough track left. Fernando held his line perfectly. 100 meters to go. 34 meters. 500 meters, Fernando. Alonso crossed the finish line to win the Monaco Grand Prix. The emotion was overwhelming. Fernando couldn't speak for a moment. 22 years of racing, and this felt like his first win all over again. "Fernando, you've won! You've won Monaco!" Marco was screaming through the radio, crying and laughing at the same time. "Thank you, Marco. Thank you for believing in me," Fernando replied, his voice breaking with emotion. The victory lapas. Fernando drove slowly around the track for his victory lap. The crowd was going absolutely crazy. People were hanging over the barriers, waving flags, screaming his name. But in the garage, something strange was happening. While all the mechanics were celebrating, Mike Crack was nowhere to be seen. He had disappeared during the final laps. taking several urgent phone calls. Dr. Andy Green noticed Mike's absence and felt worried. On the day of their driver's greatest triumph, their team principal was missing. "Where's Mike?" Andy asked one of the engineers. He said he had to take some important calls, something about the plan changing. The podium preparation, Fernando climbed out of his car in the Monaco pit lane, exhausted but triumphant. The crowd was still cheering his name. Other drivers came over to congratulate him, including Max, who showed incredible sportsmanship despite losing. "That was amazing racing," Max said, shaking Fernando's hand. "You reminded everyone today why you're a legend." "Thank you, Max. You pushed me to drive better than I have in years." But as Fernando looked around for his team, he noticed something odd. Many of the Aston Martin crew members looked happy but confused. Some were whispering to each other and looking worried. "Where's Mike?" Fernando asked Marco. He had to handle some urgent team business," Marco replied, but his voice sounded strange. The podium ceremony, standing on the top step of the Monaco podium, Fernando felt like he was 25 years old again. The crowd was singing, the anthem was playing, and champagne was spraying everywhere. This was what he had dreamed about for 10 long years. This was why he never gave up. But as Fernando looked down at the crowd during the ceremony, he spotted something that made his heart sink. In the VIP area, Lawrence Stroll was in heated discussion with several men in expensive suits. They had serious expressions and were looking at documents. Something was definitely wrong. When the ceremony ended, Fernando knew he needed answers. He had just won the greatest race of his comeback, but instead of celebrating, his team seemed to be in crisis mode. The victory was his, but the celebration would have to wait. There were secrets to uncover, and Fernando had a feeling that the radio message he had overheard was just the beginning of a much bigger story. As he walked back to the Aston Martin garage, champagne still dripping from his race suit, Fernando had no idea that his victory had just exposed a conspiracy that went far beyond his team wanting to fire him. The truth was about to come out, and it would shock everyone in Formula One. 1 hour after the race, Aston Martin Hospitality Fernando walked into the team's private area, still wearing his champagne-soaked race suit. He should have been the happiest man in Monaco, but something felt very wrong. The victory celebration had been strangely quiet. Too many worried faces, too many whispered conversations. He needed answers. "Where is Mike?" Fernando asked the first engineer he saw. He's in the back meeting room," the engineer replied nervously. "But, Fernando, maybe you should wait." "Wait for what?" Fernando's voice was sharp. "I just won Monaco. I want to talk to my team principal." Fernando pushed past the engineer and walked toward the back of the hospitality unit. He could hear voices through the thin walls. Angry voices. One of them belonged to Mike Crack. Fernando didn't knock. He opened the door and walked straight in. The confrontation begins. Mike was sitting at a small table with papers spread everywhere. He looked up when Fernando entered, and his face went pale. For a moment, neither man spoke. "Congratulations on the win," Mike said finally, but his voice sounded hollow. "Thank you," Fernando replied coldly. "Now I want to talk about something else. I want to talk about the radio message I heard during the race." Mike's face went even paler. "What radio message? Don't lie to me, Mike." Fernando's voice was calm but dangerous. "I heard you talking about firing me, about having Drugovich ready to take over for Hungary, about activating some clause in my contract." Mike's hands started shaking. "Fernando, there's been a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding? Fernando's voice got louder. You were planning to fire me in the middle of the season, and you call it a misunderstanding? The truth spills out. Mike looked down at his hands. He couldn't meet Fernando's eyes. The board, they've been pressuring me. They said your attitude was becoming a problem. They said you were too difficult to work with. Fernando felt like he had been punched in the stomach. Too difficult? I've given everything to this team. I've worked 18-hour days to help improve the car. I've never missed a meeting, never complained about the travel, never said no to any request. I know, Fernando. I know all of that. Then why? Fernando's voice cracked with emotion. Why? Were you planning to throw me away like garbage? Mike finally looked up. Because they told me I had no choice. Richard Palmer, James Wright, the other board members, they said it was either fire you or they would fire me. Fernando stared at Mike in disbelief. So you chose to save your own job instead of fighting for me? I have a family, Fernando. I have bills to pay. I couldn't afford to lose my job. The deeper betrayal, Fernando sat down heavily in a chair across from Mike. The betrayal hurt more than any crash he had ever experienced. How long? Fernando asked quietly. How long have you been planning this? 3 weeks, Mike admitted. The board called a meeting right after the last race. They had Felipe's contract ready. They wanted to announce it after Monaco if you didn't change your attitude. Change my attitude? What does that even mean? Mike shuffled through some papers on the table. They said you complain too much about the car in interviews. They said you make the team look bad when you criticize our engineering choices in public. Fernando couldn't believe what he was hearing. I tell the truth about the car because that's my job. How else can we improve if we don't admit what's wrong? I know, Fernando. I've always respected your honesty. But the board sees it differently. The two-hay plan revealed. Tell me everything, Fernando demanded. I want to know the whole plan. Mike took a deep breath. After Monaco, we were supposed to evaluate your performance and attitude. If nothing changed, we would announce that Felipe would replace you starting at the Hungarian Grand Prix. And you thought this was fair? To fire a 2-time world champion in the middle of the season? I thought it was wrong, Mike said quietly. But I was outvoted. The board had made their decision. Fernando stood up and started pacing around the small room. This is insane. I just won Monaco. I just proved that I'm still one of the best drivers in the world. And you're still talking about firing me? Fernando, things have changed. Changed how? Before Mike could answer, the door burst open. Lawrence Stroll, the team owner, walked in with 3 men in dark suits. Lawrence looked angry and determined. Lawrence, Stroll arrives. Mike, we need to talk, Lawrence said firmly. All of us. There's something you both need to know. Fernando looked at the men in suits. They didn't look like normal Formula One people. They looked like lawyers or investigators. Fernando, congratulations on an incredible victory, Lawrence said. What you did today was amazing. But there's something much bigger happening here. Bigger than my team trying to fire me? Fernando asked sarcastically. Much bigger, Lawrence confirmed. He nodded to one of the men in suits, who opened a briefcase and pulled out a tablet computer. Fernando, the plan to fire you wasn't just about your attitude or complaints. Someone has been manipulating our board members. Someone has been feeding them false information about you. Someone wanted you fired for their own reasons. The manipulation exposed. The man in the suit handed the tablet to Fernando. On the screen were emails, phone records, and financial documents. What am I looking at? Fernando asked. Evidence of corporate espionage, the man replied. Someone has been running a campaign to turn your team against you. They planted stories about your difficult personality. They convinced board members that you were hurting the team's image. Fernando scrolled through the documents, his anger growing with each page. Who? Who did this? Lawrence and the investigator exchanged glances. McLaren, specifically Zach Brown, and several people working for him. Mike's mouth fell open. McLaren. Why would they? Because they wanted Fernando, Lawrence explained. They've been trying to sign him for next year, but they knew he was happy at Aston Martin, so they decided to make him unhappy. The full conspiracy, Fernando sank back into his chair, overwhelmed. They wanted to get me fired so I would be available to join them? Exactly. They planted false stories about your attitude. They convinced our board members that you were more trouble than you were worth. They made secret payments to influence some of our decision-makers. This is illegal, Mike said, his voice barely a whisper. Very illegal, the investigator confirmed. We have evidence of bribery, corporate espionage, and contract interference. McLaren is in serious trouble. Fernando looked at Mike with new understanding. You weren't the real enemy. You were being manipulated too. Mike nodded, tears in his eyes. I'm so sorry, Fernando. I should have fought harder for you. I should have questioned why the board suddenly turned against you. The realization. Wait, Fernando said suddenly. The radio message I heard during the race, that wasn't an accident, was it? Lawrence smiled slightly. Marco, your race engineer, has been helping us gather evidence. He knew about McLaren's plan, and he wanted you to know what was really happening. Marco knew? He's been working with our security team for weeks. When he let you hear that radio message, it wasn't a technical glitch. It was deliberate. Fernando's mind was racing. So when I ignored the pit call and drove like crazy to win the race, you were unknowingly providing the evidence we needed to expose McLaren's scheme, Lawrence finished. Your incredible performance today made it impossible for anyone to claim you're washed up or difficult to work with. The apology Mike stood up and walked over to Fernando. I owe you the biggest apology of my life. I let them manipulate me into betraying you. I was weak and scared, and I'm sorry. Fernando looked at Mike for a long moment. Then he stood up and extended his hand. We were both victims of their game, Fernando said. But now we know the truth. Mike shook Fernando's hand, relief flooding his face. Does this mean... It means we start over, Fernando said. Clean slate. But this time, we do things differently. No more secrets. No more hidden agendas. If we're going to work together, it has to be based on trust and honesty. Lawrence nodded approvingly. That's exactly what this team needs. Fernando, I hope you'll consider staying with us. After what happened today, both on and off the track, I think we can build something very special together. Fernando looked around the room at the faces staring at him hopefully. A few hours ago, these people were planning to fire him. Now they were begging him to stay. I'll think about it, Fernando said finally. But first, I want to know what's going to happen to McLaren. The investigator smiled grimly. Let's just say that Zach Brown is about to have a very bad week. As Fernando left the meeting room, his head was spinning. In one day, he had gone from being secretly fired to winning Monaco to exposing a major conspiracy. But the biggest surprise was still to come. Monaco paddock. 2 hours. After the race, Fernando walked through the Formula One paddock in a daze. The sun was setting over Monaco, painting the sky orange and pink. Around him, teams were packing up their equipment. but Fernando barely noticed. His mind was still trying to process everything he had learned. McLaren had been secretly trying to destroy his career just so they could sign him. His own team had been manipulated into wanting to fire him, and somehow, his race engineer Marco had been working undercover to expose it all. But Lawrence had said the biggest surprise was still coming. What could be bigger than corporate espionage and conspiracy? Fernando was about to find out. The emergency meeting. "Fernando, wait up!" Fernando turned to see Marco running toward him. His race engineer looked excited but nervous. "We need to talk," Marco said, breathing hard. "Lawrence wants to see you again. There's more to the story." "More?" Fernando asked. "How can there be more?" "Trust me, you need to hear this." They walked back to the Aston Martin hospitality unit, where Fernando found Lawrence waiting with the same investigators from before. But now, there were new people in the room, including someone Fernando recognized but didn't expect to see. Zak Brown, the McLaren team principal, was sitting at the table with his hands folded. He looked defeated and scared. The confession. "Fernando, please sit down," Lawrence said. "Zak has something to tell you." Fernando looked at Zak with suspicion. "What's he doing here? Shouldn't he be hiding from the media?" "I asked him to come," Lawrence explained, "because the story is bigger than we thought. Much bigger." Zak looked up at Fernando with tired eyes. "I need to apologize to you, Fernando. But more than that, I need to tell you the truth about what really happened." "I already know the truth," Fernando said coldly. "You tried to get me fired so I would join your team." "That's what we wanted you to think," Zak said quietly. "But that wasn't the real plan." Fernando felt confused. "What do you mean?" "The real conspiracy," Zak took a deep breath. "The plan to get you fired wasn't so you could join McLaren. It was so you couldn't join anyone else." "I don't understand." One of the investigators opened his briefcase and pulled out more documents. "Fernando, someone paid McLaren to destroy your career. Someone wanted you out of Formula One completely." Fernando's blood ran cold. Who? Who would want to destroy my career? Zak looked ashamed. "We were hired by a group of team principals who were afraid of you. They said that as long as you were in Formula One, no young driver would ever get a fair chance. They said you were taking up a seat that should go to someone younger." "That's insane," Fernando said. "There are 20 seats in Formula One. One driver can't block everyone." "I know it's insane," Zak admitted, "but they paid us a lot of money, enough to fund our car development for 2 years. The names. Lawrence nodded to the investigator, who pulled out a list of names. "Fernando, these are the people who funded the plan to end your career." Fernando read the list, and his heart sank. Some of the biggest names in Formula One were on that paper. Team principals, board members, even some drivers' managers. "Why?" Fernando asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why do they hate me so much?" "They don't hate you," the investigator explained. "They fear you. You're 41 years old and still one of the fastest drivers in the world. You make everyone else look bad. At Monaco today, you proved that experience and skill can beat youth and technology," Lawrence added. "Some people don't want that message getting out. The scope of the plot." "It wasn't just about getting you fired from Aston Martin," Zak continued. "The plan was to make you look so difficult and unreliable that no team would ever hire you again. We were supposed to spread rumors about your attitude," one of McLaren's representatives admitted. "Make it look like you were impossible to work with. Create fake stories about you demanding special treatment." Fernando felt sick to his stomach. "How long has this been going on?" 2 years, Zak said. "Ever since you came back to Formula One?" and started driving so well. They realized you weren't going to fade away quietly. They wanted you to quit on your own, the investigator added. Make you so miserable that you would retire. The evidence, the investigator spread more documents across the table. Bank transfers, email chains, recorded phone calls. The evidence was overwhelming. They paid McLaren $5 million to run this campaign against you, Lawrence explained. But they also paid people in other teams, journalists, even some former drivers to spread negative stories about you. Fernando picked up one of the EDD emails and read it. It was from a well-known racing journalist, agreeing to write articles questioning Fernando's age and fitness. The journalist had been paid $50,000 for each negative article. "This is disgusting," Fernando said. "They tried to destroy my reputation, my livelihood, my passion for racing." "But they failed," Marco said, speaking up for the first time, "because you're stronger than they thought." Marco's role Fernando turned to look at his race engineer. "Marco, Lawrence said you've been helping to expose this. How long have you known?" Marco looked nervous. "About 6 weeks. Lawrence came to me when he first suspected something was wrong. He asked me to help gather evidence. So when I heard that radio message during the race, I made sure you heard it," Marco admitted. "It wasn't a technical glitch. I deliberately let their conversation come through to your helmet." Fernando stared at Marco in amazement. "You did that on purpose? We needed you to know what was happening. But more than that, we needed you to react the way you did. Your response to hearing about the firing plan, the way you drove like a man possessed, that became our evidence. The perfect response. Your performance today was the perfect answer to all their lies," Lawrence explained. "They said you were washed up. You won Monaco. They said you were difficult. You showed incredible sportsmanship with Max. They said you couldn't handle pressure. You drove one of the greatest races in Formula One history. Every lie they told about you was exposed by what you did on track today," the investigator added. Fernando felt overwhelmed. "So my victory today wasn't just about proving myself to my team. It was about proving myself to the entire sport." "Exactly," Zach said. "And it worked. The evidence we have now, combined with your performance, makes their conspiracy look ridiculous." "The due consequences. What happens now?" Fernando asked. The investigator smiled grimly. "Several team principals are about to lose their jobs. The journalists who took money will be banned from covering Formula One. And there will be criminal charges for fraud and conspiracy." "What about McLaren?" Fernando looked at Zach. "We're cooperating fully with the investigation," Zach said. "We know we did wrong, and we're prepared to face the consequences." "McLaren will pay a huge fine and lose development budget for next year," Lawrence explained. "But because they're helping us expose the bigger conspiracy, they won't be banned from the sport." The final revelation, but Lawrence wasn't finished. "Fernando, there's one more thing you need to know. The reason we were able to catch them so quickly." "What do you mean?" "Someone inside their conspiracy was working for us all along. Someone who was pretending to help them, but was actually gathering evidence." Fernando looked around the room. "Who?" Lawrence smiled. "Felipe Massa." Fernando's mouth fell open. "Felipe? My old teammate?" "He was approached 6 months ago to help spread negative stories about you. Instead, he came straight to me and offered to work undercover." Fernando couldn't believe it. His old friend and teammate had been protecting him this whole time. "Felipe has recordings of meetings, copies of payments, evidence of everything," the investigator explained. "Without his help, we never could have exposed this conspiracy." The emotional moment Fernando felt tears coming to his eyes. Felipe risked his reputation to protect me? He said you were like a brother to him, Lawrence explained. He said no amount of money was worth betraying that friendship. Fernando had to sit down. In one day, he had discovered the worst betrayal and the greatest loyalty of his career. Where is Felipe now? Fernando asked. Waiting outside, Marco said with a smile. He's been wanting to talk to you all day, but we needed to explain everything first. Fernando stood up, his legs shaky. I need to see him. Of course, Lawrence said. But, Fernando, there's one more thing. We need to know, after everything that's happened, after everything you've learned, do you want to stay with Aston Martin? Fernando looked around the room at all the faces watching him hopefully. His team principal, who had been manipulated into betraying him. The team owner who had fought to expose the truth. The race engineer who had risked everything to help him. Yes, Fernando said firmly, but things are going to be different from now on. No more secrets. No more lies. We do this together, as a real team. Lawrence smiled and extended his hand. Welcome to the new Aston Martin, Fernando. As Fernando shook Lawrence's hand, he realized that his victory at Monaco was about much more than winning a race. He had unknowingly helped expose the biggest conspiracy in Formula One history. But more importantly, he had discovered who his real friends were. The biggest surprise of all was that in trying to destroy him, his enemies had actually made him stronger than ever before. Monaco paddock. Evening Fernando walked out of the meeting room with his head held high. For the first time in months, he felt truly free. The weight of suspicion and doubt had been lifted from his shoulders. Now he knew the truth about everything. Waiting outside the door was Felipe Massa, his old Ferrari teammate and friend. When Felipe saw Fernando, his face broke into a huge smile. "My friend," Felipe said, opening his arms for a hug. "Congratulations on Monaco. That was incredible racing." Fernando embraced his old teammate tightly. "Etuis, Felipe. I can't believe what you did for me. You risked everything to protect me." "You would have done the same for me," Felipe replied. "That's what real friends do." The emotional reunion, the two men sat down on a bench outside the Aston Martin hospitality unit. Around them, the Monaco paddock was quieting down as teams finished packing up their equipment. "How long have you known?" Fernando asked. "About the conspiracy?" 6 months, Felipe answered. "They approached me at the Brazilian Grand Prix last year. They wanted me to tell journalists that you were difficult to work with during our Ferrari days. And you said no?" "I told them to go to hell," Felipe said with a laugh. "Then I called Lawrence Stroll immediately. We've been building a case against them ever since." Fernando shook his head in amazement. "I had no idea. I thought I was going crazy. People around me were acting strange, but I couldn't figure out why." "They were very clever," Felipe admitted. "The lies they spread were small at first. Just little comments about your attitude, your age, your demands. But they added up over time. The fallout begins as they talked. News of the conspiracy was already spreading through the Formula One world. Fernando could see journalists running between team motorhomes, making urgent phone calls, trying to get statements. On his phone, Fernando saw the first news alerts appearing. Breaking. Major F1 conspiracy exposed. Multiple teams implicated. McLaren under investigation for driver manipulation scheme. Fernando Alonso vindicated after secret plot revealed. "This is moving fast," Fernando said, showing Felipe his phone. "It has to move fast," Felipe replied. The FIA is taking this very seriously. When team principals start paying other teams to destroy drivers' careers, it threatens the integrity of the entire sport. The first consequences, within hours, the consequences began. Fernando's phone started buzzing with calls from journalists, team principals, and even other drivers who wanted to apologize for believing the false stories. The first major news came from Red Bull Racing. Their team principal, Christian Horner, released a statement admitting that he had been approached by the conspiracy but had refused to participate. "We were offered money to make negative comments about Fernando's age and fitness," Horner's statement read. "We immediately rejected this offer and reported it to the FIA. Fernando Alonso remains one of the greatest drivers in Formula One history." More revelations. By evening, more details were emerging. 3 team principals had been fired for their involvement in the conspiracy. 2 well-known racing journalists had been banned from covering Formula One after admitting they took money to write negative articles about Fernando. Even more shocking, several young drivers' managers had been involved. They had spread rumors that Fernando was blocking opportunities for younger drivers, hoping to create resentment against him. "They made it personal," Fernando said to Felipe as they read the news together. "They tried to turn the entire paddock against me." "But they failed," Felipe pointed out. "Look at all the support you're getting now." It was true. Fernando's phone was full of messages from drivers, team members, and even fans who had heard about the conspiracy. Everyone wanted to apologize for doubting him. Lewis Hamilton's Support One message particularly touched Fernando. It was from Lewis Hamilton, his old rival and sometime friend. "Fernando, I'm disgusted by what they tried to do to you. Your victory today was not just a win for you, but a win for every driver who has ever been targeted by politics and lies. You remain one of the greatest competitors I've ever faced, and I'm proud to share the track with you." Fernando showed the message to Felipe, who smiled. "Even your biggest rivals respect you. That says everything about the kind of driver and person you are." McLaren's punishment. The next major news came from the FIA. McLaren had been fined $50 million and would lose half their development budget for the next season. Zach Brown had been suspended as team principal pending a full investigation. $50 million, Fernando whistled. "That's a serious punishment." "It should be," Felipe said firmly. "What they did was unforgivable. They tried to destroy an innocent man's career for money." But Fernando felt conflicted about McLaren's punishment. "I'm angry about what they did. But I also feel sorry for the mechanics and engineers who had nothing to do with this. They'll suffer because of their boss's mistakes." "That's why you're a good man, Fernando," Felipe said. "Even after they tried to hurt you, you still care about innocent people, the bigger picture." As the evening continued, the scope of the conspiracy became clearer. It wasn't just about Fernando. The same group had targeted other older drivers, trying to force them out of the sport to make room for younger, more marketable drivers. They wanted to turn Formula One into a young man's sport only, Lawrence Stroll explained when he joined Fernando and Felipe later. They thought older drivers were bad for business. But they were wrong, Fernando said. "Experience matters in this sport. Wisdom matters. You can't just replace that with youth." "Your victory today proved that," Lawrence agreed. "You showed that skill and determination are more important than age." Fernando's decision that evening. Fernando made the most important decision of his comeback. He called a press conference for the next morning, where he would address the conspiracy publicly for the first time. "I want to speak directly to the fans," Fernando told Lawrence. "They deserve to hear the truth from me." "Are you sure?" This is going to be intense media attention. I'm sure, Fernando said firmly. I've been hiding from this fight for too long. It's time to face it head-on. The new team dynamic back at the Aston Martin garage, Fernando found a completely different atmosphere. The mechanics and engineers who had seemed distant before were now eager to talk to him. They apologized for believing the false stories. They promised their full support going forward. Mike Crack approached Fernando nervously. Fernando, I know I have a lot to make up for. I let them manipulate me into doubting you. We all make mistakes, Mike, Fernando replied. What matters is what we do next. I promise you complete transparency from now on, Mike said. No more secrets. No more hidden agendas. If someone tries to influence me against you, you'll be the first to know. Fernando shook Mike's hand. That's all I ask for. Trust and honesty. Marco's revelation. Later that evening, Marco pulled Fernando aside for a private conversation. Fernando, there's something else you should know about today, Marco said nervously. What now? Fernando asked, almost laughing. Haven't there been enough surprises? When I let you hear that radio conversation during the race, I had no idea you would react the way you did. I thought you might be upset or distracted. Instead, you drove like a man possessed. I was angry, Fernando admitted, but I turned that anger into focus. That's what made you special, Marco said. Most drivers would have been crushed by hearing they were about to be fired. You used it as motivation to drive the best race of your career. The support grows as news of the EE conspiracy spread around the world. Fernando received messages of support from unexpected places. Former world champions, team owners, even politicians condemned what had been done to him. Michael Schumacher's family sent a message through their spokesperson. Michael always said Fernando was one of the most talented drivers he ever raced against. What happened to Fernando is an attack on the sport we all love. Sebastian Vettel, who was vacationing with his family, made a special video message. Fernando, you are a true champion in every sense of the word. Your dignity throughout. This ordeal and your incredible victory today show why you are one of the greatest drivers in Formula One history. Looking forward, as Fernando prepared to leave Monaco that evening, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. The truth was out. His name was cleared. His enemies were exposed. But more than that, he had rediscovered his love for racing. For months, he had been fighting not just other drivers, but whispers and doubts and false stories. Now he could focus on what he did best, driving fast cars and winning races. What happens next? Felipe asked as they walked through the empty paddock together. Next, we build something special with Aston Martin, Fernando replied. No politics, no games, just pure racing. And what about the people who tried to destroy you? Fernando thought for a moment. They've already punished themselves. By trying to get rid of me, they made me more determined than ever. By trying to make me look bad, they made my victory today even sweeter. As Fernando looked back at the Monaco circuit one last time, he smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight he was at peace. The conspiracy that was meant to end his career had instead given him a new beginning. The reckoning was complete. Now, the real racing could begin. 6 months later, Japanese Grand Prix, Suzuka. The roar of the crowd filled Fernando's ears as he climbed out of his Aston Martin. Third place, another podium, another step forward in what had become the most incredible comeback story in Formula One history. As Fernando walked toward the podium ceremonies, He thought about how much had changed since that crazy day in Monaco. 6 months ago, his own team was planning to fire him. Today, he was leading the championship fight. Incredible drive, Fernando! Marco's voice came through his radio as he took off his helmet. That's podium number 8 this season. 8 podiums, 3 wins, and he was currently second in the World Championship, just 12 points behind Max Verstappen with 4 races to go. At 42 years old, Fernando Alonso was having the best season of his comeback. The press conference later that evening, Fernando sat in the media center facing dozens of journalists. The questions were different now. Instead of asking about his age or attitude, they wanted to know about his incredible performance and his championship chances. Fernando, 6 months ago, people were writing you off, said one journalist. Now, you're fighting for the World Championship. How do you explain this transformation? Fernando smiled. The car got better, the team got stronger, and I never stopped believing in myself. Sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest futures. Do you think about the conspiracy anymore? Asked another reporter. I think about it every day, Fernando replied honestly. Not because I'm angry, but because it reminds me to never take anything for granted. Every race, every lap, every corner is a gift. The team transformation back in the Aston Martin garage, the atmosphere was completely different from 6 months. Ego. The team that had once been plotting Fernando's departure was now united behind him like never before. Mike Crack approached Fernando with the biggest smile he'd worn all season. Fernando, the engineers have some updates for next week's race. They think we can find another 0.2 of a second. That's great news, Fernando replied. But Mike, remember our agreement, no secrets. Never again, Mike promised. Everything is transparent now. You see every email, hear every phone call, know about every decision. It was true. Since Monaco, Aston Martin had become the most open team in Formula One. Fernando was involved in every major decision. His input was not just welcomed, but actively sought out. Working with the young drivers, one of the biggest changes was Fernando's relationship with Felipe Drugovich. The young Brazilian who was supposed to replace him had instead become his protege and friend. Fernando, can you look at my data from practice? Felipe asked, approaching with his laptop. I'm struggling in Sector 2. Fernando studied the telemetry data carefully. Here, you're braking too early into turn 7. Watch how I do it in the race, then try it in the simulator. Thank you, Felipe said gratefully. I've learned more from you in 6 months than I did in 2 years of other coaching. Fernando enjoyed mentoring Felipe. Instead of seeing the young driver as a threat, he now saw him as the future of the team. When Fernando eventually retired, he wanted to leave the team in good hands. The wider impact, the conspiracy's exposure had changed Formula One in ways nobody expected. The sport's governing body, the FIA, had created new rules to prevent teams from interfering with each other's driver contracts. Journalists now had to declare any financial relationships with teams. Most importantly, the culture of the sport had shifted. Age discrimination was now taken seriously. Teams were more careful about spreading rumors or false stories about drivers. You changed the sport, Fernando, Lewis Hamilton had told him after the last race. You made it safer for all drivers, young and old. The championship fight, as the season entered its final phase, Fernando found himself in an unexpected position, fighting for his 3rd World Championship at age 42. The point standings were incredibly close. Max Verstappen, Red Bull, 398 points, Fernando Alonso, Aston Martin, 386 points, Charles Leclerc, Ferrari, 362 points. Can you believe it? Fernando said to Felipe Massa during a phone call, 6 months ago, they wanted to fire me. Now I might win the championship. I always believed, Felipe replied. That's why I risked everything to protect you. I knew this day would come. The Monaco memory. Every time Fernando got in his car, he thought about that day in Monaco. The radio message that changed everything. The decision to ignore the pit call. The incredible victory that exposed the conspiracy. That race saved my career, Fernando told Marco during a quiet moment in Japan. But more than that, it saved my love for racing. You saved your own career, Marco corrected. I just made sure you heard what you needed to hear. Everything else was you. The young engineers, one of Fernando's favorite changes, was working with the young engineers who had joined the team. Instead of seeing him as a difficult older driver, they saw him as a master craftsman who could teach them about racing. Mr. Alonso, could you explain how you knew the car would work better with softer rear springs? Asked Sarah, a 25-year-old aerodynamics engineer. Call me Fernando, he replied with a smile. And I knew because after 23 years of racing, you develop a feeling for these things. But that feeling only works if you're willing to listen to the car. Sarah nodded eagerly, taking notes. Fernando loved sharing his knowledge with the next generation. The family connection, Fernando's success, had also brought his family closer to the sport. His parents, who had worried about the stress and politics of Formula One, were now regular attendees at races. I'm so proud of you, mijo, his mother told him after the podium ceremony in Japan. Not just for winning, but for how you handled everything with dignity. You taught me to never give up, Mama, Fernando replied, hugging her tight. That lesson saved my career. Looking ahead, as Fernando prepared for the final 4 races of the season, he felt a sense of completeness he had never experienced before. Win or lose the championship, he had already achieved something more important. He had proven that integrity and perseverance could triumph over lies and manipulation. What's the plan for next year? Lawrence Stroll asked during a team dinner in Japan. Keep racing, keep fighting, keep proving that age is just a number, Fernando replied. I'm not ready to retire yet. I feel like I'm just getting started. And it was true. Despite being 42, Fernando felt younger and more motivated than he had in years. The conspiracy that was meant to end his career had instead stripped away all the doubt and fear that had been holding him back. The new culture, the Aston Martin team, had also transformed. The fear and politics that once dominated the garage had been replaced by openness and collaboration. Team members no longer worried about hidden agendas or secret meetings. This is how Formula One should be, Dr. Andy Green told Fernando. No games, no manipulation, just pure racing and engineering. It took a crisis to get here, Fernando replied, but maybe that crisis was exactly what we needed. The final revelation, ATE. Fernando sat in his hotel room that night in Japan, preparing for the championship fight ahead. His phone buzzed with a text message from Marco. Fernando, there's something I never told you about Monaco. When I let you hear that radio conversation, I had no idea it would lead to all this. I just wanted you to know the truth. But watching what you did with that truth, how you turned betrayal into motivation, conspiracy into triumph, that's when I knew you were truly special. The radio message wasn't a glitch, but your response to it? That was pure magic. Fernando smiled as he read the message. The radio glitch that revealed the conspiracy had been Marco's way of giving him the truth. But everything that happened after, the incredible drive, the victory, the exposure of the conspiracy, the championship fight. That had all been Fernando's choice. He had chosen to fight instead of surrender. He had chosen to race harder instead of giving up. He had chosen to turn the worst day of his career into the beginning of his greatest comeback. As Fernando looked out at the lights of Suzuka, he thought about the young driver who had won his first race in Hungary 20 years ago. That driver had been talented but naive, fast but inexperienced. The driver sitting in this hotel room was different. He was wiser, stronger, and more determined than ever before. He had survived everything Formula One could throw at him: the politics, the conspiracies, the lies, the betrayals. And he was still here, still fighting, still winning. 4 races to go in the championship fight. 4 races to complete one of the greatest comeback stories in sports history. Fernando Alonso was ready for whatever came next. The radio message that was meant to end his career had instead given him a new beginning. The conspiracy that was designed to destroy him had made him stronger than ever. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, new opportunities to prove that legends never truly fade away. They just wait for the right moment to remind the world why they became legends in the first place. And Fernando's moment was now. We'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment and tell us your city or country. It's amazing to connect with viewers from all around the world who share our passion for incredible stories. If you enjoyed this emotional journey, please hit that like button. It really helps us reach more people who love inspiring tales of never giving up. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for many more fascinating stories like this one. Most importantly, share this video with your friends and family. Stories like Fernando's remind us that with determination and the support of true friends, we can overcome any challenge life throws our way. Let's spread that message of kindness and awareness together. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next incredible story.